I'm Jamie Dahl with Central State University Extension.
And I'm Dave Apsley with Ohio State University Extension.
And we are excited to be here today, do another little segment of Tree Talk, and we're going to be building on this oak story, and we're going to talk about why it is that oak is in jeopardy in Southeast Ohio in particular. And kind of to kick that off, Dave, there's an analogy I think I've heard you use a couple times where you compare oak to Goldilocks.
Yeah, so what's Goldilocks have to do with oak? Well, oak are pretty particular. It's like the three bears. And if, depending on the situation, if we do nothing in our woods and no trees are harvested, or we only take a few trees out of the canopy, trees that like deep shade do really well, and that's the maples. So the maples can grow and survive in like 2% full sunlight, especially sugar. So they get started under the canopy of these oaks and they just hang out. And if we don't do anything, the maples start creeping up and become layers and layers under the forest. And so if it's too shady, the oaks lose to the maples. If we have a clear cut or a tornado came through or something happened where there's lots of light, then oaks can grow in those conditions, but other species do better. Things like tulip tree or yellow poplar or cherry or aspen, they'll grow very well in the full sun. So in order to get oaks started, we really need that middle ground. We need that just right condition where we've got some partial light, and that's where the oaks excel. And we'll talk a little bit more as we go from there.
Okay. And so part of the reason that sometimes in that fully open, maybe clear cut or fully disturbed setting, which oaks can be okay with, but basically the problem is these other species grow faster than them. And doesn't that have something to do, Dave, with kind of how oaks focus their energy? And I think you have a picture to maybe share that.
We've got a picture of Todd Hutchison, who's a researcher with the Delaware Lab of the Northern Research Station of the Forest Service. He's holding up an oak seedling. We've had our graphic guy Brad do a little work on that seedling so you can see it better. But what oaks do is when they're young seedlings, the acorn germinates, they put a lot of energy into the roots. And if they get that partial light, they're putting energy into the roots. And that root just gets larger and larger and larger. And it only really happens if the light's just right. If it's a maple, they put very little energy into the roots, they're putting energy into the tops. So what we want to do is get that right light so the oaks can get there and start developing that big taproot. Looks like a big carrot. And then once that happens, things in nature, disturbance happens. So one of the more common disturbances was fire. And if you have fire happening occasionally, a maple doesn't have a big root system, the fire's going to eventually kill it. With one burn or a few burns, a young maple seedling doesn't survive. With the oak, it's got that root system. It's got all that energy in the underground portion. Fire kills the top, and the top can start, or the root can start to grow, and that gives them a big competitive advantage. So things like fire, even livestock grazing at the right levels might have helped it. And right now we have a lot less fire. We don't have the livestock in the woods, and so the oaks are starting to lose. The other thing that's happened is the timber harvesting practices. We've gone away from harvesting a little bit heavier where we just take individual trees out of the canopy. And a lot of times those trees are, guess what? They're oaks.
The oaks.
So we've almost got a bounty on the oaks. We're taking them out of the canopy, but we're not creating conditions for young oaks to come in behind them.
Yeah, and that was in the words of a landowner, actually, right, Dave, that said oaks have a bounty on them. So so interesting. So this kind of pointing out to folks, like understanding the history of any forest, because a lot of these disturbances that maybe some people think of as negative were actually a benefit to this particular species.
Right, and disturbance happens in nature. We have a lot of oak on the landscape for really two reasons. One, it's a perfect place to grow oak, but two, you know, a lot of these forests came out of that heavy disturbance period when a lot of this ground was cleared for agriculture. There were cattle all over the place. And as hard as that is on forest conditions, oaks of all the species probably did the best. So we have historically probably high levels of oak currently now. And we realize there's probably going to be a bit of a shift, but we want to keep oak as a major component as well.
Okay, and so likely disturbance will be part of that then if we're going to do that.
Very well could.
Yeah.
So again, we've got more segments coming up on oak and why they're important, so stay tuned.